right, seeing none, we will move on with our agenda. And that brings us to item 10, approval of the minutes of the March 13th, 2023 board meeting. And do I have a motion? Mr. Hogan.
I'd like to make the motion we approve the minutes of the March 13th, 2023 board meeting.
Do I have a second? Mr. Scully. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? And that motion carries 7-0. That moves us to item 11, public participation. It is my understanding that we do not have any speakers for tonight's public participation. So moving right along, that brings us to our action agenda. Item 12, action as necessary or appropriate on matters discussed in executive session. Do I have a motion? Mr. Hogan.
Ms. Blackburn-Hines, I've got two motions I'm going to roll into one, if that's okay. I'd like to make the motion the board approve selected employment items shown in Exhibit A and 2023-2024 reappointments shown in Exhibit B.
And do I have a second? Mr. Scully. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? And I see 7. That motion carries 7-0. Any more motions from executive session?
Yes, I have a motion that we approve. I move that we approve the professional development contract per Exhibit D with Kieschnick and Associates.
Do I have a second? Ms. Barnhart? All right, I have a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? And that is 7. That motion carries 7-0. Any other items? I believe that covers everything on executive session. So that moves us to item 13, second and final reading, approval of proposed revisions to board policy, i.e. organization of instruction, Exhibit F.
Madam Chair, members of the board, we bring for second and final reading board policy, i.e. I have Mr. Giuliano available for any questions on that policy.
Do I have a motion? Sorry.
I move that we approve second and final reading of proposed revisions to board policy, i.e. organization of instruction.
Do I have a second? Mr. Hogan. I also need to sit on that end so I can see everybody at one time. Sorry, I apologize. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That motion carries 7-0. And that brings us to item 14, second and final reading approval of the new board policy, GCLE unencumbered time, Exhibit G.
Madam Chair, for second and final reading, we have Dr. Wicker available for any questions.
Do I have a motion? Ms. Huddle.
I move that we approve second and final reading of new board policy, GCLE unencumbered time.
Do I have a second? Mr. Hogan. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion carries 7-0. And that moves us to item 15, approval of proposed revisions to the 2016 to 2021 capital projects, Exhibit H.
Madam Chair, I bring forth Executive Director of Operations, Mr. Dave Wiseman, to present our capital projects.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, members of the board, Dr. Ross, members of the community. Thank you for allowing me a chance to come back with you and talk about capital projects. This is actually a two-part slide. One is just to give you an update on what we've done so far with the 2022-2023 capital budget. And then the last part is just a revision of the 16 through 21 capital projects that we've asked for you to consider. So, as you know, last board meeting we had a presentation from CMTA that talked about our solar improvements. One of the things I wanted to point out that we were able to do a lot of this stuff using ESSER funds through the finance office and Trish Larkin working with us, getting some of this stuff so that we could make sure that we're spending ESSER funds in the right categories and also allow us to do some additional capital projects. So you'll be hearing more about that as we go along, not only in this presentation, but in those future. One of the things we were able to do is if you look to your left, my right, my left, your right. The old Chapin or Crossroads Intermediate rooftop And now the new Crossroads Intermediate rooftop. You can see a big difference. We were able to get that done over the summer. It looks really good. Even after the rains yesterday, I have not heard of any leaks in that area, so I'm real excited about that. Again, we were able to work with the ESSER funds and do some additional improvements with a couple HVACs on that as well. So, as you know, last Monday, I believe it started, the demolition of the Chapin Stadium press box. That is completely gone, and as we look forward to going back and starting the date to start rebuilding that. We will also start the replacement of the field turf for Chapin High School. This will be the third of the 3 turfs that we replaced. As you know, we've already replaced the turf at Dutch Fork High School. We've also made improvements or redid the track at Dutch Fork High School. It is completed with the exception of the final coating, which I think the 28th of March will be its 30-day cure time. So hopefully at the next board meeting, I'll be able to tell you that is completely done. We'll have to, I think it takes about 2 weeks to lay the final coating on that. And of course, this summer we completed the replacement of the turf at Irmo High School. As you know, we also did some improvements on the solar panels, or installed solar panels at Irmo High School. Again, we were able to do a couple things with the ESSER funds. As of today, this is what we've done with the technology portion of the capital budget. 4,000 Chromebooks. You have the list in front of you. I'll let you look through that for a second. We're looking at continuing to upgrade on our Chromebooks, not only this year, but also for next year. And now what I want to present to you, back in October, I brought to you the first time a revision for some funding left over from the 2016 to 2021 capital projects. You approved those. We started those those projects shortly thereafter. I've come back to you and asked you again that we've gone through that list with a fine-tooth comb and tried to prioritize some things. If I could, those projects were never part of the 2016-2021 capital projects. Once we realized we had some money, I think it was back in October of 21, Todd Biedenball came back to you and said, hey, here's a new list of projects that we can do with this money. So the history started in October of 2020 with these projects. So those are what we've completed up to so far. You can see we made a pretty good dent in those projects. These are just some of the things. The Dutch Fork track exceeded our challenges. There was just a lot of deficiencies from several years ago that we were able to come back to you for additional funding. And so when they put that top coating on there, I don't expect to see a problem in that for at least a decade. I'm excited about that. Last time I talked to you about the security alarms, I showed you a picture that really wasn't what it was, but you see those little 2 dots on the left pictures? Those are actually the magnetic sensors that allow us to know when the door is open and how long it's open. It's set up on a timer. It's an annoying little alarm that we're trying to figure out how to make louder and longer in some cases. So we're experimenting with that. We should start installing them, I'm hoping, during spring break. We're going to start doing some installation on those. These are some recommendations that I've asked you to consider, and in some of the projects that we had scheduled out of 1621 capital budget, I'm asking that some of the funding that we did not spend because the project came under budget, that we reallocate that money, and you can see in the reasons why I've listed those. And then there's a couple projects that we really want to roll into a much bigger project with some of those schools. So we're asking that you allow us to reallocate some of that money so that we can continue doing some improvements with this funding. Specifically, what we want to look at is, again, we want to get as many of these exterior alarms done as possible, especially hopefully before the school starts. We met with our contractor, our architect, last week in regards to the vestibules. We're looking at that a little bit differently this time. We're trying to make sure we can integrate that with the existing facility so we can reduce some of the costs, utilize what we have there, and use some of our old people when it comes down to camera installation and stuff like that. We think we'll get a lot further with the money available to us and can do a lot more for the schools. And then the last, as I mentioned last time, when we approved the additional safety officer, we didn't have a chance to ensure that he had a vehicle to drive, so we asked that you allow us to reallocate some of that money so we can purchase him a vehicle. And pending your questions.
All right, do I have a motion before we get into discussion? Ms. Huddle?
I move that we approve the proposed revisions to the 2016-2021 capital projects per Exhibit H.
And Ms. Barnhart, do you second? A second. All right, and we'll move into discussion. I saw Mr. Satterfield's hand up.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, Mr. Wiseman. Unfortunately, by design, if we get 10 years out of the Dutch Fork track, because the way that stadium is designed, the track is also the football stadium, and they get, every time those players come across there with their cleats on and all that traffic on the track, it's a lot of wear and tear. But it is what it is, I guess. The other question is there any way, I know that you've got some recommendations for reallocations of funds, but I know, and I've mentioned this before one time, I know we're adding this new wing to Irmo High School, and it's going to be really nice. But I have walked that school, and the area, like back by the gym, and some of those areas that don't look quite as attractive, it would be nice if we could figure out some way of allocating some funds for, I don't care if it's power washing and painting and just, you know, some little project back there just to sort of help beautify that part of the school as well. I don't know what can be used or what might be possible, but it's going to be so nice to see that new, and the Fine Arts Center is awesome. I was there for the arts night, and it's really nice. But that back side of the school, I guess, back by the gym, hasn't changed since Mr. Hogan was at Irmo High School, and yeah, I think it just could use a little extra help.
Yes, sir. I think we have some of that money in our current budget, operational budget that we're looking at. We've been down there a number of times. We did some work, minimum work on some of the areas. We're looking at the locker rooms down at Irmo High School I'm specifically concerned about. We did a test pouring, if you will, in some of the restroom areas with an epoxy that's so much cheaper and more durable. We're looking at doing that some not only at Dutch Fork and at Irmo. I think after this week, we're going to go in and repoxy some of the, like the baseball press box at Irmo High School. Yeah. It's really a beautiful color. It has the yellow and black in there, and we're looking at inlaying some of the logos in there as well. Again, it's very durable. More importantly, it's cheaper and longer lasting. So we've already started touching some of those areas. But one of the things that Dr. Ross asked me to do is look at the life safety items first. And
yeah, I was going to bring that up because I went to a basketball game and had a hard time getting back to my car.
Yes, sir. So I want to make sure that we look at that. You know, we've looked at trying to improve a number of different things, and you'll see in the upcoming 23-24 budget that we've identified some needs for each of the schools in some of their sports areas. But we're looking at trying to touch every school equally as best we can.
Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Scully.
Yeah, that was a really good point, Mr. Satterfield, about the track at Dutch Fork. I hadn't even thought about that. But that seems like a fairly easy solution. Do we have like a covering we can put, even if it's just for the part that the players walk on? Is there something we can do to protect that part of the track?
I know they had a little bridge when we were doing just the field and not the track, because they'd already milled the track, so we might be able to bring that back in. They actually laid some of the old artificial turf over it. So
yeah,
that,
just something, there seems like that would be a fairly easy.
And Dutch Fork High School is the only one that has that unique situation, which is why we upgraded their sound system, just because they have further to go across that open field. Yep. So, yes, sir. I'll look at that.
Oh, see, the right side. I'm gonna start with Ms. Barnhart.
Going back to the door alarms, could you kind of give us an explanation of exactly how those work, those magnetic stripes? You open the door and it sounds, and you're saying that it's not loud enough, or we don't have enough in all the schools, or?
Well, we found a state contractor who happens to be the ones that do our card readers, so it's going to tie into that system. So it's actually going to make it a little bit cheaper with us. We put a couple up in the warehouse building where IT and myself work at, and we've been testing it out, holding the door open. I think it took like 2 seconds from the door being held open, the alarm going off, and me getting the text. So we're just making sure that we've covered every situation. But I will tell you, depending on where the door is, we're going to have to reevaluate each alarm. It might be a big end of a big hallway. Mine's a kind of smaller area, so the alarm sounds loud. But we might have to adjust it based on where it's actually placed in the school based on their exterior doors. But it's just really a magnetic contact between the frame and the door itself. So when you break it, it gives you about 10 seconds to get out the door, and then it'll send out an audible alarm and then a text message to those we designate to.
Gotcha.
Ms. Huddle.
Thank you.
I just wanted you to maybe clarify what the upgrades being made to the Chapin High School Stadium. I've heard some comments that the entire stadium is being replaced, and I don't think that's the case, so I thought maybe you could clarify at least what isn't being replaced.
What isn't being replaced.
Like, for
Hold on,
example,
let
the
me just-
home
I had to backtrack
Yeah,
that
like
in my
the
mind.
home- the home
I can tell you what I
stands.
know we're doing
Yeah.
with this particular project. Obviously, we're building a new press box. There will be some additional upgrades to the visitor locker rooms and some additional upgrades, obviously, to the seating, which is what this started on the visitor side. As they go through, they'll be power washing the seats and doing some upgrades on that side as part of the home side as well. So those are the projects that we're going to make sure that we accomplish with the money that you allowed us to have. And that's as far as it goes at this point.
So it's not like a brand-new stadium, like we're
No,
demoing
ma'am.
the whole stadium and then building up from scratch, the
No,
Taj
ma'am.
Mahal of
It's
football
just really, the
stadiums?
biggest thing you're going to see is the new press box.
Right.
And some seating.
Okay. And I also have a question on some of the items that were recommending to reallocate, specifically to Nursery Road. I see where the restroom floor replacement, we've reassessed and we're asking to reallocate those funds and tying in some dish room renovations into a future project, I think. Wait a minute. Yeah. I'm trying to make sure I'm going across. Yep, tying in the dish room renovations into a future project. Why is that happening? Like, what led to that? The reason I'm asking is I've heard some parents express some concerns about different issues in Nursery Road. Is that because we're thinking about our future facilities and not putting too much money in there right now, or is that need not there right now?
I think the need is there, not necessarily right now.
Okay.
And I really want to make sure that we're getting the most for our money in this particular round. I want to address the most critical needs in this case. We actually did the epoxy flooring at Nursery Roads on a couple of their staff bathrooms that worked out really well. And we want to kind of test that out for the next 6 months to see how well that holds up. If it holds up like we think, we might be able to do that with the remaining capital money from either this year or next year. But we haven't lost sight of that. In fact, we haven't lost sight of any of those projects. We're just trying to consolidate so that we know where we're focusing our attention on, mostly to the life safety issues, and then going back and readdressing those issues. For example, that dish room, I think it was $5,000. We asked around and no one could tell me whose idea it was or what needed to be done. So we're just evaluating each project. I think one of them is the Chapin Intermediate Walkway. We went up there and walked through with the principal, and the issue was when it rained real hard, water was coming down on the students even though they had a walkway. So after talking with him, they did some reworking of the car rider line and did some working on the awning itself, and he doesn't have that issue now. So in the future, as we look at these schools based on conditions, we might want to look at the front of Chapin Intermediate School. $250,000 not enough to tear it down, let alone to put something else in its place. So I'm just going to be, realistic with what we can do with what we have, reevaluating it, see if there's something cheaper we can do to make it work. In this case, Mr. Davis figured it out with by the time I got up there and talked to him, he'd already had a solution. He was okay with us doing that. And so we've talked to the schools. Of course, Ms. Fisher is the new principal, and we'll get back with her. But throughout October, November, December, and January, we've actually done the assessments at all the schools, which is typically we'll wait till the end of the school year. But we have those done, and you'll see that in the future capital projects. And we looked at what really their greatest needs are and what we can determine if there's a better way to do it. And that's what this is about. And I think there's, on a number of those things, you'll see us completing the list in a different order and hopefully with a little bit less funding needed to do that. We're just trying to be a little bit more cautious with our funding.
Okay, so there are no, speaking of safety, there are no like sanitation safety issues at Nurture
No,
Road?
ma'am.
Okay.
No, ma'am. I mean, there are not reflected in this. We're working that through operational money, just some old plumbing issues that we have to address.
Okay. All right, Mr. Scully.
Real quickly, Mr. Wiseman, on the reallocation, what's your timeline for those projects?
Let me think about that for a second.
I guess, what's your estimated start and end dates,
Here-
generally?
I want to start as soon as you approve this. I've got a couple things going on tomorrow that if you approve, I can start dropping some.
So these are
POs.
immediate, that's really money, these are immediate projects you want to get started on?
Yes, sir. I want to put it blunt, I want to spend the money so we can focus on, this is just a lot of money that's being held up, and I'd rather get these projects done as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's what I needed, thank you.
Do I have any other questions? All right, seeing no more questions, I'm going to call for the vote. There's a motion on the floor. All in favor of approving the proposed revisions to the 2016-2021 capital projects? And I see 7, so that motion carries 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiseman.